色社会主义思想研究院院长秦轩。秦轩院长是中央马克思主义理论研究和建设工程首席专家，长期从事中国特色社会主义理论与党的创新理论研究。他演讲的主题是现代化的鲜明特色及全球南方价值。大家欢迎。
好了，尊敬的各位领导、各位来宾，大家上午好。在这一个美好的季节，也是在这一个特殊的日子，我们相聚在这里，感到非常的高兴。为什么说今天是一个特殊的日子啊？因为今天是重庆市直辖29年，也就是在29年前的今天，重庆市直辖市挂牌。所以说，它这是一个特别值得纪念的这样一个日子。那么今天呢，我给大家在这个场合分享一个题目，就是呢，我们讲的就是中国式现代化的鲜明特色及其它的南方的价值。这个分享一下中国式现代化的鲜明特色及南方价值。因为今天上午呢，已经有好几位领导和专家谈到了这样一个话题。大家都知道呢，实现现代化是世界各国人民的共同的一个追求。回顾一下，1945年在二战结束的时候，全球仅仅只有5、6个国家全实现了工业化，就是完成了竞争，建立起了独立完整的工业化的体系和现代国家制度。而其他的绝大部分的国家，要么是殖民地、半殖民地，要么是传统的农业国，要么是工业化还没有开始的时期。而1949年，就15年之后的几年之后，中华人民共和国成立。中华人民共和国成立的那一年，中国的 GDP 的总量只有145亿美元，人均 GDP 也只有35美元，而工业产值也只有36.4亿美元，城镇化率也就是10%不到。属于一个典型的农业国，可以说比今天世界上最穷的国家还要穷。而截止到去年初，全球已经实现现代化的国家有37个发达的经济体，其中欧洲31个，北美洲2个，亚太地区里面有4个这样的一个这个国家。而在这一年里面，还有140还没有完成现代化的任务。这些国家包括非洲的全部54个，拉美的33个，亚洲地区的48个，还有大洋洲地区里面的14个这个国家。这149个国家构成了全球南方国家里面的核心的一个集合体。所以，由于绝大部分国家还没有实现现代化，所以在2023年的3月15号，习近平在参加中国共产党与世界政党高层对话的会上，提到了一个现代化质问。他认为世界多变导致了人类现代社会的现代化的进程又一次来到了历史的十字路口。是两极分化还是共同富裕？是物质至上还是物质精神协调发展？是竭泽而渔还是人与自然的和谐共生？是零和博弈还是合作共赢？是照搬照抄别国的模式还是立足自身的国情自主的发展？我们究竟需要一个什么样的现代化？怎样才能实现现代化？这是现代化质问，这是各个国家的政党都需要探索和回答的这样一个问题。而在探索回答这个问题的过程中，我觉得中国共产党在新中国成立以来创造了奇迹，因为近几十年来，中国式现代化的速度、规模与成效是非常显著的。在这几十年的时间里面，我们从一个传统的农业国转变成为世界第一制造业大国，我们从一个一穷二白的经济落后国家转化成为世界第2大经济体。我们的人民生活从贫穷到温饱到小康，现在实现了全面的小康。我们的政治发展实行从封建专制的统治转变成了全过程人民民主和人民民主专制的这样一个统治。我们在对外关系方面，在交往社会形态方面，我们实现了半封闭社会向开放社会的这个全面 转变。而重庆是中国中西部地区的一个重要的市镇，那个重镇，在新中国成立以来，尤其是直辖29年以来，区域现代化取得了一系列成就。它突破了内陆区域发展的局限，完成了从老工业经济到西部制造经济的高低的转换。它促进了城乡区域发展协调的发展，破解了超大城市的城乡二元结构。它平衡了生态保护与产业发展，筑牢了长江上游重要的生态屏障。它探索出来了一条跨省域协同机制，实现了从内陆腹地到开放前沿的转变。它创造了3地超大城市治理，形成了一整套适合于西部迁发的多山多库区的特大城市的现代化的实践的方案。所以重庆的实践是中国式现代化一个实践里面的一个样本，它形成了一整套可以复制、可以推广的实践经验，同时也为全球南方国家的超大城市的治理和区域现代化提供了可知借鉴的方案。这里面这是我们中国式现代化的一个典型。我认为中国式现代化经过几十年的发展之后，它形成了一系列的特色和优势。这些特色的话呢，可以供我们尚未还没有实现现代化的全球100多个国家来吸收和借鉴。因为下面还剩下6分钟的时间，我只是这个什么呀，简单的讲一下我的主要的这样一个标题。我认为中国式现代化的特色和它可以给南方国家里面提供的经验，主要有9个方面。第一个方面，中国式现代化是中国共产党领导的现代化。因为中国的现代化虽然起步转晚，但是它的重大的转折，它后来所取得的一系列的成功，都是在中国共产党的领导下完成的。它与西方现代化以资本为主导的这个什么是完全这个不同的。它与南方国家里面照搬西方的发展模式里面出现了重大的失误，也有着很大的不同。它带来的启示是，现代化是长期的、系统性的、宏大的工程。必须有一个稳定坚强、真正的代表人民利益的领导核心，只有这样才能够避免政治内耗与治理的失效，形成推进现代化的强大的合力，实现长期稳定的高质量的发展。这是第一条启示。第二条启示，中国式的现代化它是社会主义的这个什么现代化。那么长期以来，西方将自己的现代化模式包装成唯一正确的一种普世的方案。全球南方很多国家也曾经盲目照搬西方的模式，结果纷纷的陷入了拉美陷阱、非洲困局，出现了经济崩溃、政治动荡、社会撕裂、族群对立的这样一种局面，现代化几乎技术于中断。而中国走出了一条完全适合于中国国情的社会主义的现代化的道路。这条道路被时间证明是可以避免出现资本主义那种罪恶的这样的一个过程，又能集中优势发挥能动性，实现比资本主义更快更合理的发展的。而它给我们南方国家带来的启示是，现代化绝不是西方化，每个国家的历史文化国情的不同，现代化的路径的也不一样。全球南方国家只有摒弃对西方模式的迷信，从本国实际出发，找到适合自己的现代化道路，才能避免陷入照搬陷阱。这是第2条经验和特色和启示。第3条，中国式现代化是一种自主内生的这样一种现代化。长期以来，西方现代化模式的核心的逻辑是构建中心外围的全球依附性的体系，而西方国家就是凭借着他们的优势，而这个什么呀，实现了他们的自身的现代化。而南方国家在这一种格局之下，只能搞单一的资源出口、初级产品的加工，经济结构也导致极度的脆弱，所以极易受到西方的金融的收割、技术的卡脖子和贸易的制裁，永远无法实施自主的发展。而中国在现代化的过程中，在共产党的领导之下，我们走出了一条独立自主的自力更生的这个什么依据于中国国情的这样一种现代化的道路。我们早早的建立了一种这个什么完整的国民经济的这种体系，把现代化的主导权牢牢地掌握在自己手中。所以它给我们带来的核心启示是，依附型的发展不可能实现真正的现代化。全球南方国家只有坚持独立自主，着力构建 完整自主的产业体系，全力突破核心技术瓶颈，才能彻底的摆脱全球产业链的低端锁定，实现经济的自主可控和高质量的发展，为现代化建设筑牢坚实的物质基础。这是第2点特色和这个启示。第3点，中国式现代化是人口超大规模国家的现代化。刚才有几位嘉宾发言的时候也谈到了这一点。然后中国14亿人口，然后呢，这个实现现代化是世界上的一个难题。中国共产党依靠自身的努力带领人民完成这样任务。它给我们带来的南方国家带来的启示是，现代化不是少数人的现代化，而是全体人民的现代化。全球南方国家实现现代化，只有坚持人民至上，一切为了人民，一切依靠人民，现代化才能够获得源源不断的动力，得到长期可持续的这样一种发展。这是第4点。第5点，中国式现代化是全体人民共同富裕的这样一个现代化，所以它与西方国家里面的两极分化实现了明显的这样一个不同。刚才也有几位同志谈到了这一点，它给全球南方国家带来的启示是，全球南方国家只有把改善民生、实现共同富裕、实现公平正义作为现代化的出发点和落脚点，才能获得最广大人民的持久的支持，实现现代化的可持续推进，彻底的避免增长与民生脱节的这样一个陷阱。这是第5点。第6点，中国式现代化是物质文明和精神文明协调发展的这样一个现代化。这种现代化与西藏单向度的发展形成了一个鲜明的这样一个对比。那么这一个现代化的发展道路，对于全球南方国家带来的重要的启示是，全球南方不能走现物质膨胀后补救精神的老路，要同步投入经济发展与精神塑造，避免贫富撕裂、价值观空心化的陷阱，走出兼顾民生富足与社会向上的现代化的道路。第7点，中国式现代化是人与自然和谐的和谐共生的现代化。那么这一个现代化给南方国家带来的启示是，全球南方这个国家里面，由于底子薄、生态脆弱，完全不能够复制西方高能耗、高消耗的这种模式，必须立足本国的资源禀赋，走出特色绿色发展的这样一种道路。第8点，中国式现代化是和平发展的现代化。刚才也有几位同志谈到了这一点，它给全球南方国家带来的启示是，现代化不是零和博弈，更不是国强敌霸，和平发展、合作共赢是实现现代化的全新文明的逻辑。全球南方国家只有摒弃西方的霸权思维和零和博弈的理念，坚持走和平发展的道路，才能够为自身的现代化建设创造稳定的国际环境，同时推动全球南方国家的共同发展，实现人类文明的共同进步。第9点，中国式现代化是属于一种赶超型的现代化。那么西方国家是一个串联式的发展的过程，工业化、城镇化、农业现代化、信息化是顺序发展的。而中国作为一个后发现代化的国家，全球南方国家的重要一员，后来居上，现代化是一个并列式的一个过程，工业化、信息化、城镇化、农业现代化是叠加发展的。中国的实践证明，全球南方国家实现跨越式的发展、赶超式的发展是可能的。而它带来的启示是，全球南方国家必须依靠自身的人口资源、文明传统、制度基础来设计赶超方案，统筹后发优势与自主根基，发挥有为政府有市场的协同合力，破解后发治理的短板，兼顾硬实力赶超与软实力同步的提升，分阶段的梯度的推进现代化的进程。总的来说，全球南方国家在面向未来的过程之中，我们面临的机遇是共同的，我们面临的挑战也是非常相似的，这需要我们南方国家更多的努力，更多的合作。我也建议大家和希望大家我们一起来努力。好了，谢谢大家。
感谢秦轩院长，感谢秦轩院长的精彩分享。那么秦轩院长结合重庆现代化的实践，阐明了中国式现代化何以成为全球南方的可对话参照。我想为我们 理解中国式现代化道路的世界意义，提供了深入的学历思考。再次感谢秦轩院长。接下来呢，我们有请中国人民大学重阳金融研究院院长、全球领导力学院院长王文。王文院长是全球治理、大国关系、中国式现代化研究领域的权威专家，长期深耕国际战略与发展研究，学术成果丰硕，国际影响力广泛。他演讲的主题是中国式现代化大国崛起新路，大家欢迎。
特别感谢有这机会再来重庆啊！重庆是我最喜欢的城市，没有之一，也是我儿子最喜欢的城市。他1个星期前刚刚高考，然后呢，在这之前的2年呢，我带着他在中国走了10-20个城市。我问他，我说你高考完了以后，你要选择哪个城市度过你大学的4年呢？这个星期我一直在问他，终于他说，那如果可以的话，就到重庆来。因为重庆真的是，他跟我说，他说这个重庆有美景，有美食，当然还有美女，典型的体现了下一代一个少男他的偏好和。那么，所以今天讨论的这个话题啊，讲中国式现代化，那重庆我觉得是在中国呢非常经典的体现了中国式现代化的发展，它的魅力，尤其是过去的10多年，重庆的这个中国的发展，体现出来它的国际的影响力和国际的魅力。那么今天呢，受主办方委托呢，讲述一个中国式现代化作为一个新路的一个过程。刚才秦轩老师讲的非常好，刚才他下来以后我就说，我说你讲了我就没法讲了，因为他讲的内容啊，远远这个深意啊，都远远高于我之上，对他的演讲内容做一个小补充。我也认为呢，这个高度认同刚才秦老师讲的，中国式现代化它具有一个特殊性，它确实对世界啊，对全球南方国家都有很大的这个启发。那怎么样看待中国式现代化呢？我自己认为呢，它至少从5个特征的角度去看待这个中国式现代化，它是具有西方式的这个现代化是不具有的，或者说至少在特征上不那么明显的5个方面，5大特征：规模的效率、价值的目标、文明生态、发展路径，还有化治理，这个5大特征。我用非常短时间里面简单的做一个阐释。第一个呢，从体量的角度来讲，西方发达国家全部的现代化人口加起来大概是10个亿，就我们经常讲的西方差不多30个国家。那么中国人口呢是4个亿，规模的远远超过了现在所有发达国家的人口。第二个呢，西方现代化呢，它是分批次的渐进的完成，不是一个国家或者全体一下子全部完成，而是过去的200多年渐进式完成了这些国家的现代化。那么中国呢，在几十年之内，差不多也就40多年，尤其过去的10-20年，几乎同步的，在很多问题，工业化、城镇化、老龄化、城乡差距、精准扶贫，几乎是同时进行了。用习总书记的话说呢，就是伟大的、具有新的历史特征的伟大斗争，来解决这些挑战。那么第3呢，就是空间的限制。西方的现代化呢，在过去200年呢，其实它是伴随着人口的这个对外的移民、殖民的分流，不仅仅是在这个西欧地区，它实际上向整个世界进行了这个对外移民和殖民的分流，所以它具有这个资源的这个分散性和活性啊，某种层面上可以这么说。那么中国式现代化呢，它是立足在本国土地上，完全靠内生的发展去来解决和消化巨大的14亿人口发展的压力。当然，过去的10多年，中国这个企业开始了出海那么但这种出海是和平式的、合作式的，后面我也会讲到。第2个方面呢，就是价值的这个，我们很明晰的可以看到，刚才前面很多专家也谈到共同富裕和2极分化的问题。那美国式的现代化目前看来，其实出现了相当大程度的贫富鸿沟，还有阶层的固化。 今年在中国出现了一个非常重要的形容美国的现代化的词，那就叫斩杀线 ，Q line。那么在美国的现代化中，我们会很明显的看到它的资本优先大于这个大众的利益，因此出现了现在越来越严重的贫富分化。而中国式现代化呢，从起步开始呢，就锚定了全体人民的共同富裕，发展不只是为了少数人的致富，是少数人致富带动了多数人致富，最终实现了城乡区域和不同人群的均衡的增收。那么，尤其这些过去的14年，将近15年的时间里面，中国的这个脱贫攻坚、乡村振兴、区域协调发展、收入的分配的改革，这个区别于西方的先富，然后呢就不管贫穷的这样的一个发展模式。那么这个重庆是典型的这个区域协调发展的受益者。那么更重要的是呢，我们会看到西方的现代化的这个逻辑，很明显的就是资本的主导，而中国式现代化呢，坚持人民至上，成果发展人民去共享。尤其疫情的时候，前些年疫情的时候，就表现得更加的明显。第三个就是从文明共生的维度上看，刚才秦轩老师也讲到，欧美的这个工业化普遍是走着先污染后治，依靠对外去转移这个高耗能的产业，去转嫁这个环境。我们过去很崇拜西方的这个治理环境，其实现在应该祛魅啊，没有必要崇拜他们看，因为他们的环境治理的好，是因为他们把工厂全都挪到了这个其他国家，尤其是中国。而中国式现代化呢，同步却嵌入到了绿色的发展，所以我们提出了绿水青山，就是金山银山。那么欧美的现代化更重要，过去10年，它体现出来了对应对气候变化的虚伪性和低执行度。去年年底到现在，今年是巴黎协定气候协定推出的10周年。我去年写了一篇很长的学术论文，我去回顾这个过去10年的巴黎协定，突然发现只有中国主要经济体里面只有中国是最忠实的去执行巴黎协定的，欧美国家没有一个国家忠实的执行了巴黎协定。所以过去的10年中国执行了巴黎协定，中国的新增的清洁能源，包括新能源车、光伏、水能、风能，全世界新增的60%甚至90%都是发生在中国，所以说明中国很努力的去执行巴黎协定。那么中国式现代化呢，而且还兼顾了这个精神富足、物质富足，不会陷入到西方那样单一的物质主义陷阱中。所以你看，有一点非常非常重要，中国的毒品的严控，还有枪支的严控，这一点我认为是西方任何一个国家都没法比拟的。而且中国这些年来创造了全球最安全的城市治理和最便捷的基础设施。第4个方面呢，就是发展路径的维度。刚才秦轩老师也讲到和平的发展，而西方的现代化呢，充满着战争、殖民、掠夺、对外扩张。中国坚持独立自主，我们的现代化和平发展要消化14亿人的他的这个每天的吃喝拉撒睡，他的物质的需求。我们没有靠侵略没有靠屠杀，没有靠殖民，没有靠掠夺不公平的掠夺他国的这个资源来实现了我们的富强，这是一种奇迹发展的奇迹。那么所以我们可以看到这个，尤其这些年来，你看西方的这个崛起，它是一种排他性的崛起。刚才秦老师也讲到，2战以后的70多年是西方领先的70多年，但是你会发现70多年过去了，仅仅也就西方那些国家实现了现代化，其他国家并没有它带动其他国家现代化。相反，中国却是包容式的现代化，通过我们自己对外的合作，一带一路等等，希望能够推动其他国家也去搞更好的工业化。最典型的一个例子就是过去20年，非洲的基础设施建设80%以上的非洲新增基础设施建设都是中国公司在承建。前天佛得角跟德国打了比赛，那么小的一个国家进了德国的一个球，世界杯，对吧？佛得角感谢的是谁？感谢的是中国，因为中国帮佛得角建了他这个国家唯一一个足球体育场，他们得以练足球。第5呢，就是文明制度的维度，中国式的现代化，它有1000年的文明的根基， 数千年来，我们都追求天下的大同、民本的思想，追求和谐的这个共生，和西方这个二元对立啊、对抗思维啊是完全。在西方我们听得更多的是二元对立是正和负、赢和输这个败和胜、黑和白正义和邪恶这个两类的两分法。我说这个哲学在中国看来太简单，太幼稚。中国的哲学远远高于这种两分法那么更重要的，中国的这个制度的根基呢，是立足于本国的历史和文化的传统自主探索制度，不搞西方所谓的那些议会制或者资本主导的三权分立的这个制度模型。那么刚才于应权局长也讲到，佛山先生这些年来太在反思前段时间我也给他写了一封信他给我回信了他说他很想来中国，非常想来中国。我说你要来，我一定邀请你来。那么更重要一点呢，过去的这些年，中国呢通过了这个若干个5年规划，现在已经是15个5年规划，去集中办大事，走出了这一条长期的一个发展的战略。所以我们现在的确定性已经制定到2035年、2050年。对全世界的主要经济体中，中国是最具有确定性的，不像西方的制度一样翻烙饼，这个4年是这样，下个4年又翻过来所以我觉得从这个角度上来讲，的的确确应该重新发现中国的优势。所以这张表格里面，我就很明晰的看到西方式的现代化和中国式的现代化之间在规模、效率、价值目标、文明共生、发展路径、文化制度上的这种显著的差别。所以最后的一点呢，我就想说，那中国式现代化对全球南方国家来讲，这个核心建议，第一呢，发展的信心我在人民大学这个目前在主持的全球领导力学院的项目，去年我们有33位来自南部非洲的省长级的学员来攻读人民大学的博士学位。今年我们又有拉丁美洲和还欧亚国家20多个国家，大概70多位学员申请我们的博士学位。那么他们每次来的时候，我都跟他们讲，他们会到中国，每年会来几个月，在中国这个学习我们的理论。我就跟他们讲，我说中国能够做到的都能够做到，每一个全球南方国家都能做到这是发展信心的问题。第二个呢是制度创新刚才反复讲，历史没有终结，新的历史实际上刚刚的开始。尤其中国的制度，我认为它实际上是一个在基于我们学习了西方的制度，学习了美国的制度，我们吸取了他们的很多优势，进而我们同时呢，我们又平息了他们的很多这个弱点和劣势，然后我们进行了重大的制度创新，走到了现在。所以我觉得历史怎么会终结呢？新的世界历史刚刚开始。第三就是产业政策，我们循序渐进的去构建一个完整的工业的体系和实体的经济。我们金融很重要，金融要金融强国，但是呢，金融不能成为一个国家经济的完全的主体。一个国家的真正富强的经济的主体仍然应该是工业化和实体经济。那么第4个启示呢是崛起的路径。中国一向反对一个国家崛起是要靠对外的战争和在内的这个政党内耗来实现在这两点是中国在汲取美国衰落进程中的2大非常大的教训。第5点呢，当然就是跨国的合作。中国的现代化的伟大的目标，更宏大的目标，就是我们在20大报告中也讲到，在中国共产党党章中都讲到的类似的这样的话，就是不仅仅为本国谋福祉，还要为天下谋大同。所以最后的结论呢，就是中国式的现代化呢，最大的全球意义就是不在于我们要去输出一套固定的模板，而是要证明一件事：发展中国家完全可以不靠依附，不靠对抗，不靠牺牲底层的民众，不靠破坏生态，走出一条属于自己的可持续的有尊严的现代化的道路，为占世界绝大多数人口全球南方呢提供一个全新的选择。这就是我想跟各位来阐释的内容。这是我的联系方式，如果大家有意向的话，还可以扫这个二维码，我们继续跟各位来探讨这个中国式的现代化世界意义若干的话题。再次感谢邀请，谢谢各位。
感谢王文院长的深刻阐释哈。那王文院长聚焦世界现代化比较的视角，从5个具体的这个特征的这样一个维度哈，阐释了中国式现代化有别于西方现代化的特殊性。我想呢，为我们思考人类现代化的发展路径，是提供了富有洞见的思想启发哈。再次感谢王文院长。接下来呢，我们有请拉丁美洲社会科学理事会专家，丹尼拉·佩罗塔教授。丹尼拉·佩罗塔教授是中拉关系、全球南方发展、现代化转型研究的资深专家，长期致力于中国与拉美发展经验比较与合作路径研究。那么他演讲的主题是中国式现代化与拉美国家发展转型机遇、挑战与合作空间。大家欢迎。
Okay, well, thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and all the authorities present here. And thank you very much for the invitation. It's my first time in China and my first time in Chongqing, so I'm deeply happy, honored to be here and to contribute to this important dialogue. Today, I would like to offer a Latin American perspective on Chinese modernization. And the question is, what can Latin America learn from the Chinese experience when rethinking development in the 21st century? I will argue that Chinese modernization is relevant because it reopens strategic debates in Latin America about development, autonomy, and cooperation. Sorry. So we are living through a period of profound global change. We see major shifts in the distribution of world power. We face digital revolution and AI. We confront climate crisis and growing inequalities. These transformations force us to rethink development itself. For a long time, modernization was often equated with westernization, as if there were one legitimate answer or path to modernity. Chinese modernization challenges this assumption. It reminds us that development is not a linear process. Different societies can follow different historical pathways. Thus, China's trajectory has helped reopen a fundamental discussion on the relationship between modernization, development, and historical diversity. And this is a very important question for the Latin American context. From a Latin American perspective, one of the most interesting aspects of Chinese modernization is that it reopens important questions for us. It reminds us that modernization goes beyond economic growth because modernization is a broader project of social transformation for our society. 4 concepts are especially important: people-centered development, common prosperity, ecological civilization, and a community with a shared future for humanity. In more recent debates, these ideas have also been linked to the notion of high-quality development, which seeks to incorporate technological innovation, environmental sustainability, social well-being, and the strengthening of national capabilities, as the previous professors have shown. Another important element that is always missing in modernization is culture. Culture is not heritage or identity. It becomes a productive and strategic resource for development. Education, creativity, shared values, symbolic production, and cultural capacities are seen as elements that help orient long-term processes of transformation. And this is particularly relevant for Latin America. And when I say Latin America, I say Latin America and the Caribbean. That is always missing from our speech. In Latin America and the Caribbean, development has been a persistent historical concern. Yet, it is a distinctive feature of the Latin American experience. Much of Latin American political and intellectual thought link development to 2 additional and fundamental concerns: autonomy, and regional integration. Development, autonomy, and integration constitutes a deeply rooted triad in the region's intellectual and political history. Regional integration was never viewed as merely as a matter of economic cooperation or diplomatic coordination. It was conceived as a mechanism for building collective capacities. Regional integration is a tool for development and is a tool for autonomy. The creation of larger markets, scientific and technological cooperation, the coordination of public policies, and the construction of common positions in international affairs were all seen as ways of strengthening the development prospects of societies that, acting individually, face significant structural constraints. This vision was also linked to a broader reflection on scale. The challenges of development for the Latin American countries require political and economic spaces larger than those provided by individual nation states. And finally, Latin American integration was not conceived solely in economic or political terms. From its origins, it was associated with the construction of a shared historical and cultural community. The idea of Latin America as a space connected by common languages, historical experiences, intellectual traditions, and collective aspirations provided one of the foundations upon which different integration initiatives were built. In this sense, development, autonomy, integration, and cultural identity formed part of a broader reflection on the region's place in the world, and especially how development was to be succeed. So, why does China matters to Latin America? From this perspective, from the Latin American perspective, Chinese modernization is particularly relevant because it brings back to the forefront 4 issues that have historically shaped our thinking. And the Latin American Council of Social Science is part of that reflection. We were born in 1967 as part of the need for our region to think in autonomous terms and to try to solve these 2 problems, development and autonomy. So the problem of development related to underdevelopment and the problem of dependence related to gain margins of autonomy. So why does China matter? First of all, productive transformation. Latin America still struggles to diversify productive structure dependence on commodities. China highlights the importance of industrial policy, infrastructure innovation, long-term productive upgrading. Those are needs for the Latin American context. Second, state capacity and planning. Latin American developmental traditions have long emphasized the importance of institutions capable of coordinating economic actors, guiding investment, and sustaining long-term strategic objectives. Yet, recurring crises, fiscal constraints, and political discontinuities have often made it difficult to consolidate enduring projects of transformation. The Chinese experience demonstrates the importance of a state capacity in development process and the ability to articulate technological, educational, and territorial policies with long-term strategic horizons. For Latin America, the key lesson is the importance of strengthening institutions capable of sustaining collective transformation projects beyond immediate political cycles. Third, knowledge and innovation. Today, development is increasingly linked to the capacity to generate science, technology, and innovation. AI, digitalization, emerging technological infrastructures, and knowledge-based economies are shaping the foundations of contemporary development. This connects with the idea of epistemic community, and I think we are now, all of us, an epistemic community. So what is epistemic autonomy? The capacity to produce knowledge relevant to our own realities. Today, discussions of autonomy extend beyond political and economic dimensions. They also involve the ability to participate actively in knowledge production, technological development, and the governance of the scientific and digital infrastructures that increasingly organize the global economy. Fourth, South-South cooperation and collective capacity building. Many of the central challenges of development, as we mentioned during the presentations that were preceding me, climate change, the energy transition, technological regulation, food security, and knowledge production, exceed the capacities of countries acting alone. In this context, South-South cooperation acquires renewed importance. China and Latin America have followed different historical trajectories, yet both have sought to expand development opportunities, strengthen national capabilities, and increase the room for maneuver within an international system marked by significant asymmetries. The key lesson is to build collective capacities to transform the global landscape to fulfill developmental goals. To transform the global landscape. That is our mission here today. So, these debates can be translated into concrete cooperation. I see at least 4 strategic areas. First, green transition. Latin America possesses strategic assets for the global energy transition, including significant reserves of critical minerals, biodiversity, and considerable potential for renewable energy development. At the same time, China has emerged as a global leader in green industries such as electric mobility, renewable energy, and decarbonization technology. And Chongqing is an example of that. This creates important opportunities for joint initiatives that can simultaneously promote economic development, environmental sustainability, and technological capacity building. Second, infrastructure and connectivity. China has accumulated significant experience in the planning and implementation of large-scale infrastructure projects. For Latin America, where important infrastructure gaps persist, cooperation can contribute to greater territorial integration, enhance economic competitiveness, and expanded development opportunities. Third, science, technology, and universities. Universities and research centers and research can play a fundamental role in building shared capacities. Joint research projects, academic mobility, human resource development, and collaborative innovation initiatives offer valuable opportunities for strengthening scientific and technological capabilities in both regions and gaining epistemic autonomy. Fourth, culture and mutual learning. Academic and cultural exchanges, the circulation of ideas, the translation of experiences, and dialogue among intellectual traditions help expand collective learning capacities and deepen mutual understanding between societies. Culture is also a strategic resource for development, contributing to the creative, educational, and institutional capacities required to address the contemporary challenges. And finally, there is a broader dimension related to South-South cooperation and global governance. Contemporary challenges increasingly transcend the capacities of individual countries acting alone, and renewed forms of international cooperation are required. In this context, dialogue mechanisms between China and Latin America provide valuable opportunities to strengthen political dialogue and promote a more active participation of the Global South in international debates. And not only to promote this active participation, but the role of the Global South of transforming the global governance for a more equitable governance. So what are the main challenges? Cooperation also faces major structural challenges. The first is commodity dependence. A large share of Latin American exports remain concentrated in primary goods. The challenge is to ensure that economic cooperation contributes to strengthening productive capacities and generate greater value within the region. A second challenge concerns technological asymmetry. Existing gaps in research, development, and innovation therefore risk becoming new sources of international inequality. For this reason, scientific and technological cooperation can only fully contribute to development if it helps strengthen local capacities, supports the training of human resources, and fosters innovation ecosystems capable of generating knowledge and technology within the region itself. The issue is closely connected to epistemic autonomy. The transformative potential of cooperation will be greatest when it contributes to the co-production of knowledge rather than simply facilitating the circulation of knowledge produced elsewhere. The development of shared research agendas, cooperation among universities, and the strengthening of scientific networks can play a central role in these processes. This connects to a third challenge, unequal value chains. The key question here is how do we move forward from extraction toward value creation? And finally, there is a challenge related to regional integration. Latin America has historically conceived integration as a tool for development and for expanding political autonomy. Yet, integration progress and stagnation that have limited the region's capacity to respond collectively to global challenges. In this context, many of the opportunities associated with energy transition, technological innovation, scientific research, and infrastructure development will reach their full potential only if they are articulated through regional strategies capable of identifying common priorities, coordinating policies, and strengthening collective capacities. And universities have a key role here, trying to gather this together. And finally, let me conclude with one final message. The transformation of development requires us to recognize that economic growth, social inclusion, ecological sustainability, knowledge production, and culture are not separate objectives. They are interconnected components of a broader strategy aimed at improving the well-being of our societies. Thus, there's no single path to modernity. The diversity of development pathways is not an obstacle to international cooperation. It is one of its greatest strengths. The dialogue between China and Latin America matters because it creates a space for mutual learning, shared capacities, greater autonomy, and a stronger global South. China and Latin America can become a space for joint reflection on how to build societies that are more prosperous, more sustainable, more inclusive, and more capable of shaping their own futures. Thank you very much.
感谢佩罗塔教授哈。那么他跟我们大家一起分享了他对中国式现代化的理解啊，并尤其提出了文化在这个区域合作应对全球挑战这个过程中的这个重要作用啊。尤其印象深刻的是他从一些具体的层面展示了中国式现代化对全球南方，尤其是从这个拉美视角出发这个阐释了对全球南方的这个价值和影响。我想对我们深刻理解今天我们会议的主题就是中国式现代化的世界意义，是非常具有启发意义的。再次感谢佩罗塔教授。接下来呢，我们有请匈牙利多瑙河研究所副主任彼得希塔什教授。彼得希塔什教授长期专注于中东欧与中国合作、绿色发展、可持续现代化研究，对区域合作与绿色转型有深刻的洞察。那么他今天演讲的主题是中国式现代化中的绿色转型与中东欧合作机遇。大家掌声欢迎。
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here. It's a great honor. Let me speak about a topic today that is increasingly shaping the global economic and environmental landscape of the 21st century. Over the next few minutes, I'd like to explore how China's development model is evolving and what this transition and transformation means not only to China itself, but also to my region, Central and Eastern Europe. In particular, I'm going to focus on three key questions. The first question is, what does the green transition mean in the context of Chinese modernization? Secondly, what achievements and challenges can we observe in China's green transformation? And finally, what opportunities for cooperation are emerging between China and the countries of the Central and Eastern European region? Today, we can say, I think, with deep honor, that climate change, energy security, and sustainable development are among the most important issues shaping international politics and the global economy as well. In this context, China occupies a unique position. On the one hand, this wonderful country is the world's largest consumer of energy and the largest emitter of carbon dioxide. On the other hand, however, it has become a global leader in green energy, electric mobility, and green technologies. To understand China's green transition, we need to move beyond traditional Western modernization theories. Over the past decade, the concept of Chinese modernization has undergone a significant transformation. The earlier development model, which was primarily driven by rapid economic growth, has gradually given way to a new approach that emphasizes innovation, quality, and sustainability. One of the defining features of Chinese modernization is the idea of harmonious coexistence between humanity and nature. This approach differs from the early stages of Western industrialization, which often follow the pollute first, clean up later pattern. Instead, China is seeking a development path that avoids the environmental costs associated with traditional industrialization. At the heart of this vision lies the concept of an ecological civilization. Ecological civilization is not merely a political slogan. It represents a strategic choice. Chinese policymakers recognize that the previous resource-intensive growth model had reached both its economic and environmental limits. The new objective is high-quality development, where the focus is no longer solely on the volume of GDP growth, but increasingly on efficiency, innovation, and sustainability. As we all know, the Industrial Revolution first took place in the West. By the time Europe's emissions peaked around 1990, Western economies had already become highly developed and affluent. Much of their heavy industry had also been relocated and outsourced. China's situation is fundamentally different. It truly became the world's factory, especially after joining the WTO in the early 2000s. As a result, China is attempting to peak its emissions, while parts of its economy are still undergoing rapid industrialization. China's green transition is guided by two major milestones, both announced by President Xi Jinping at the United Nations General Assembly in 2020. The first target is to reach peak carbon emissions before 2030, while the second is to achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. These goals are remarkably ambitious. Well, to put this into perspective, China aims to move from peak emissions to carbon neutrality in roughly 30 years, whereas the European Union has had nearly 60 years for the similar transition. Let us now look at some of the facts and figures behind this economic structural transformation, its innermost structural transformation. One important point should be emphasized. China is not planning to become a green power in the future. It is already one today. In fact, China has become the main engine and behind the global expansion of renewable energy. Every year, it installs more solar and wind power capacity than the rest of the world combined. Green development in China is therefore much more than environmental policy. It's a comprehensive economic and social strategy aimed at improving energy efficiency, upgrading the industrial structure, encouraging innovation, improving quality of life, and strengthening international competitiveness. In the photovoltaic industry, China controls more than 80% of the global solar supply chain. A similar leadership position can be seen in ultra-high voltage transmission networks. Most renewable energy is generated in China's sparsely populated western and northern regions, while demand is concentrated along the eastern coast. To bridge this gap, China has developed some of the world's most advanced ultra-high voltage direct current transmission systems capable of transmitting electricity over thousands of kilometers with minimal energy loss. This brings us to what is often called the new tree. For decades, Chinese exports were associated with textiles, furniture, and household appliances. Today, those industries have largely been replaced by a new generation of high-tech green exports. These new three industries are, first, the electric vehicles. China is now the world's largest EV market and manufacturer, with companies such as BYD and NIO becoming globally recognized brands. Second, lithium-ion batteries. Around 70% of global battery manufacturing capacity is located in China, led by firms such as CATL and BYD. And third, solar panels and other renewable energy technologies, where China constitutes to dominate global production and innovation. The green transition creates not only challenges, but also significant opportunities for cooperation between China and the countries of the European Union. At this point, let us turn to the reality of the Central and European regions. To understand the potential for cooperation, we need to recognize the specific circumstances facing Central and Eastern European countries. Countries such as Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, and the Western Balkan states are all confronting major structural challenges as they adapt to the objectives of the European Green Deal. First, there is the issue of fossil fuel dependence. Several countries in the region still rely heavily on coal, such as Poland and the Czech Republic, while others, including Hungary or Slovakia, remain dependent on natural gas for power generation and district heating. Second, there are serious grid limitations. Much of the existing electricity infrastructure was designed decades ago and is not fully prepared to integrate large volumes of intermittent renewable energy, such as solar or wind power. Third, the region faces growing industrial transformation pressures. The CE countries, particularly the Visegrad countries, which are Czechia, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia, have long served as a manufacturing base for the European automotive industry, especially for German car makers. If the region fails to adapt quickly to the transition toward electric mobility, it risks losing competitiveness in global value chains. And this is the point where Chinese capabilities and Central European needs begin to intersect. The relationship is not a one-way street. Rather, it has the potential to become a mutually beneficial partnership across several key regions and sectors. The first area of development of the electric mobility ecosystem. This is perhaps the most visible and fastest growing field of cooperation. Hungary provides an excellent case study in this case. Major investments such as the CATL battery plant in Debrecen and the BYD vehicle manufacturing facility in Szeged demonstrate that Chinese companies are no longer simply exporting to Europe, they are increasingly localizing production within Europe itself. This development is strategically important for several reasons. It helps CE countries maintain their position within global automobile value chains, and also it creates opportunities for direct technology transfer and skills development. And it also allows Chinese companies to reduce transportation risks and better navigate trade barriers by producing inside the European market. The second area is renewable energy and grid integration. In the Western Balkans and several non-EU countries in the region, Chinese firms have played an important role in financing and also constructing hydropower and wind energy projects. Within EU member states, cooperation is increasingly focused on technology supply and infrastructure solutions. In particular, Chinese large-scale battery energy storage systems, often referred to as BESS, could play a crucial role in helping regional electricity grid manage the growing amount of solar power generation and improve overall system stability. The third area which I highlight is research, development, and academic cooperation. The green transition is not only about building factories, it's also about building knowledge. Universities and research institutions across Central Europe have established partnerships with Chinese counterparts in areas such as advanced materials, hydrogen technologies, and circular economy. Joint laboratories, research projects, and doctoral programs can help ensure that technological adaptation is supported by a strong and sustainable knowledge base. At the same time, a balanced assessment requires us to acknowledge the challenges and tensions surrounding these partnerships. Three major issues currently shape the debate. The first concerns the European Union's de-risking strategy. The EU has made it clear that it seeks to reduce excessive dependencies on China by stopping short of fuel economic decoupling. In sectors such as electric vehicles and solar technologies, concerns about state subsidies and market distortions have led to anti-subsidy investigations and the introduction of protective trade measures. The second challenge relates to environmental sustainability. Across the CEE region, legitimate public debates have emerged regarding environmental impact of large-scale battery manufacturing, particularly with respect to water consumption and energy demand. From both a scientific and policy perspective, it's essential that these investments comply with the highest environmental standards, including both EU regulations and local requirements. At the same time, Chinese partners can contribute by introducing the most advanced water-saving, energy-efficient, and closed-loop production technologies. The third challenge concerns regulatory compliance. Chinese suppliers and investors operating in Europe must increasingly adapt to the EU's evolving sustainability framework. This includes the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which introduces carbon-related costs for certain imported products. It also includes the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which requires companies to assess and address environmental and human rights risks throughout their supply chains. The projects most likely to succeed in Central and Eastern Europe will be those that proactively embrace these transparency and sustainability requirements. Dear ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, China's green transition is not simply a domestic policy initiative. It's one of the most important drivers of the global sustainability transformation. The ecological dimension of Chinese modernization has generated unprecedented industrial capacity and technological innovation. For Central and Eastern Europe, this reality presents both a challenge and an opportunity. If the region can build pragmatic, rational, and mutually beneficial partnerships with China, it has the potential to become one of the key centers of Europe's green industrial transformation by preserving its economic stability and strategic autonomy. Ultimately, the role of science and evidence-based economic policymaking is to build bridges across geopolitical divisions and to create frameworks that ensure cooperation serves both global and local sustainability goals. Thank you very much for your attention.
感谢西塔什教授的这个思考哈，那么他从作为一个国外学者的这样一个视角，跟我们分享了他对中国绿色转型啊，或者说生态文明的这样一种理解， 提出了绿色转型为连接中国与中东或者其他国家的合作所带来了一些机遇我想呢，他的分享尤其是为我们重庆未来探索加强与相关国家在相关领域的合作是提供了一个务实的一个方向和路径。再次感谢西塔什教授。最后呢，我们有请澳大利亚昆士兰大学建筑设计和规划学院院长阿里切西教授。阿里切西教授是国际知名城市规划与治理专家。那么他呢，主要是以全球视野来研究中国内陆开放、城市韧性治理与可持续发展。那么他今天演讲的主题是中国式现代化的地方实践，重庆在城市治理与开放发展中的探索。大家掌声欢迎。
Morning, everyone. I'd like to first start by thanking the organizers and all of you here for the event today. I'd like to say sincerely that I really believe that, and I truly say that every time, that Chongqing is my favorite Chinese city. And for many reasons, I have been collaborating here with Chongqing city government and many universities for several years. Happy to be back again and again. And also, I'd like to acknowledge that as of last month, I also became a visiting professor at Chongqing University, extending more collaboration with the universities in Chongqing. I have a heavy load to carry in this talk because it's the last talk before lunch, and everyone has spoken very well about various case studies, but I'd like to end the sessions hopefully with more perspective on the case of Chongqing. That's where we are, and hopefully can elaborate a bit more on the context of the city of Chongqing. So I think the important part for us is to look at Chongqing's urban governance and this open development approach that we often look into. I'm not going to go through all the text. I'll try to make sure I capture what needs to happen in terms of the actual message from the talk today. I think the important part is that every time I come back here, it reminds me of that Chongqing is more than just a building. We were talking about this topic a couple of days ago and yesterday. It's more than the physical infrastructure, more than just what we see on the ground. There is quite a lot happening here. The dynamism of the city as a living entity is just fascinating. And I try my best to make sure every time to encourage people to visit Chongqing, just making sure they understand how a city of this size can actually operate. This is quite fascinating. And Chongqing is genuinely a role model of its own. It's very unique in many ways. It's a role model in the context of Western China, in the context of China, and I do believe in the global scale as well. So I think the important thing is about to look at from the perspective of the practice of Chinese modernization. So I can elaborate a bit more on what does it mean in terms of the different pathways modernization entails in the context of China and how Chongqing is achieving this through various perspectives, various dimensions. My first visit here actually goes back to October 2019. A couple of weeks just after the flooding event happened, I think it was in September or end of September, there was a flooding here. And I came to visit and analyzing the flood areas in the city. And since then, I think I came here more than 40 times. I was counting earlier. I came to 30 and I realized I have been here more times, and probably about 40 times now. And more than that, I think I ended up writing a book about Chongqing, which I rarely would do so, writing about any city in particular. Like my many good academic peers, we do like to write books. Some people ask me, when do you sleep? I say I blink and I sleep. And other time I'm writing at night, quite a lot at night. I'm like an owl. I do write at nights. So I was just counting earlier to see if I capture properly. I haven't counted my books, but I think I have about 68 books, academic books, 12 of which are actually focused in the context of China, purely about China. China's urbanization, urban development, urban strategies, urban sustainability, all those topics that we have covered. But only one out of all my books is focused on one city so far. And this is the city, this is the book about the context of Chongqing. So I introduced the city. Some people say, my colleagues that they have read the book, they say it's quite poetic. And I think it has to be a bit poetic because the city offers that poetry of some sort. And I have by birth, I have Iranian blood or Persian blood in my body. So poetry is a big part of my heritage as well to start with. And also I do believe the poetic writing a good academic book would hopefully be more received much better than writing purely academic. And I think when people read this, oh, that makes sense. I think that should be the response. That makes sense. That's a nice perspective, or this is a very good way of capturing that particular part of the city. So I think the important part is that the book goes into the idea of how the city is actually, like Chongqing, is consuming and creating at the same time. It's quite fascinating. Not many cities do this. And Chongqing, being the largest metropolitan region in the world, actually does that so well. And I do believe the study is like a sort of urban mapping. I like urban mapping studies. And I like to make sure it showcases very well what the city offers. What it misses, but I think mostly what it offers. It's more like a journey. The book is like a journey. The first chapter starts with Chesh and Chongqing. I refer to myself, Chesh and Chongqing, a bit of more personal touch into entering the city and the book itself. And then it zooms into key areas. I do believe cities are living entities. It delves into this urban pulse, the living style. And more on that, it goes into the depth of the lifestyle, key areas, the values that are actually hidden in China's modernization, but particularly in Chongqing's modernization. Three key areas are mapped in the book. So looking into the multiple layers of the city, multiple identities of the city, and multiple localities of the city. The book is divided into these three parts, and each part is covering 4 key areas of focus as part of the narrative of the book. I'm going to go through them very, very briefly, but this is how it is structured, and I picked one sample from each, just making sure that I finish the talk as early as possible, and making sure that I cover everything that's needed in this particular session. So when we talk about layers, actually I talked about layers in my earlier book as well, when I talked about that cities are more just as I mentioned, more than physical entities. They have that sense of memory, and which is very important. Memory is not an act that we do have. It's a very much perceptible factor that we live with. In this particular book, earlier book, I really touched on the key areas that cities go through transitions. Memories live with them. Some of them, they die out. Some of them, they live. The ones that live by, continue to live, are the ones that we need to value the most, and we need to capitalize. And I think Chongqing does that very well because of its multi-layers of historical presence, and the preservation of that is very much visible when you walk through many parts of the city. So to me, I think rather than have a significant place, it's about having a significance of place in mind, how a place can become significant. And Chongqing is a good example. When I talk about the cities and layers, I think the important part comes into this perception, how we experience, how we perceive a particular city. So in this particular part, I tried my best to map the verticality of the city, the horizontality of the city, going to streets and paths, as well as going to the streets and zones. So some of the work is based on a very much distinguished person, an urbanist. Many years ago, Kevin Lynch, when he talked about cities in 5 different dimensions. 2 of the dimensions, of course, are here, or 3 of them actually are here, this particular area of research as well. The important part in here is that from the perspective of Chinese modernization, these layers of urban spaces reveal how local innovation, adaptive governance, and people-oriented development are transforming everyday everyday life while preserving the uniqueness of the city identity of place. I think that's very important to be captured. It's not about city developing fast or modernizing very fast physically, but also about how it can capture the realities on the ground as well. This multi-layered approach actually shows the excellence governance of the city of Chongqing that we have experienced and can experience. Governance is about people. And I keep emphasizing that in many places. Governance is very importantly driven and led, and it's having the center of governance is people. People play a big part in how governance can become successful. And people make cities livable and alive. That's true in many places that you go to see places. If there are no people on the ground, if there are no people in places, then you don't actually have a good urban life. But Chongqing, as the book subtitle entails, is the city that truly never sleeps, mainly because people are always in places. And I remember the first time I decided to write about this book was 3:30 in the morning when we were having hot pot, and which is quite unusual in many parts of the world to have a hot pot at 3:30 in the morning. But in Chongqing, that's absolutely okay. And the other part is about the multi-identities of the city of Chongqing. This goes back to my earlier work that I believe cities have particular identity, but also multiple identities. As we, as humans, have one identity as a person, but have multiple identities. You can be a parent, you can be a child to your parents, you can be a teacher, we have those identities, we play those identities through our life as well. To me, identity is a relation. It changes based on the relationships we have. So again, this book touches on identity, and I thought this plays a big part when we talk about multi-identities of the city of Chongqing as well later on. So in this part of the book, I touch on urbanity, the urban intelligence part of urbanity is more than life. It's more about intelligence that is hidden within the city environments. Moving into urban life, diversity, and relations. The four parts of the book capture very much Chongqing's the approach, this multi-approach of having the identity to be preserved, created, co-created, and to be rejuvenated as well. So you can see that quite commonly through the case of Chongqing in many parts of the city, in fact, and how it enhances the sense of belonging through adaptive governance in many ways that people play a big part in communities around, within and around Chongqing. So multi-identities actually should be developed through openness. I think openness plays a big part. So it's about how we can actually have the rhythms of everyday life, as we can see in Chongqing, revealing a distinctive dimension of Chinese modernization. And as mentioned so thoroughly and so well in the previous presentation, Chinese modernization is very different to what we are used to in different parts of the world. And this is something that is experienced through infrastructure, technology, development, but also through countless interactions and also the opportunities that you have to experience in particular parts of the city or the city as a whole. I think this is very important to be looked at because the spaces and how the spatial planning is creating the opportunities for Chongqing and the experiences of Chongqing to be very much perceptible is very much based on the values of modernization that Chongqing follows very thoroughly. The last part of the book is about localities. Even though that Chongqing is my favorite city, Yunnan province still remains as my favorite province. And I really, truly have a very good experience of visiting places in Yunnan. And a few years back, when I wrote a book about Yunnan, about particularly mapping the urban regeneration in multiple cities, 4 cities we studied back then. And I thought the life experience, city life experiences in cities in Yunnan are quite distinctive and are very unique. Not from the lens of a tourist, but from the lens of a person who understands the city, hopefully better than normal, let's say an average person, because we refer to academics as non-normal people. And the idea was to really understand what localities are there in place in Yunnan. So building on this narrative of understanding localities and the city life, which this book entails very well, I thought it's important to look into localities and multi-localities of the city of Chongqing. So I captured as best as possible the old and new, sometimes old versus new, which you can see in various levels and layers of the city. Food culture, which is truly the big part of the city. Nature and water and people's places. 4 key areas that really shape the localities of the city. And I was mentioning in an interview a couple of days ago that when you look at the natural environments, water environments, Chongqing, they are not just the background areas of the city. They are a integrated part of the city. The built and natural are very much integrated in a very well-established way. And you can see they are very much connected as well. And I think this example shows very much the sense of the ecological civilization in the context of China. I wrote about eco-cities much earlier as well, and I became this believer of eco-cities because I think eco-cities is oxymoron terminology, but the ecological civilization narrative, as has been highlighted in sessions today and a couple of days ago as well, it really represents the value of the nature and natural environments of nature as the harmonious development with cities. I do believe this essence is very important when we look at the model of Chongqing, achieving the ecological civilization in its own very way as well. The multi-localities are actually enriched with people and their culture within every space that you walk through or experience. So Chongqing's multi-locality is not simply a product of geography. People assume so. Oh, we have a mountain, we have a river, and that's how it works. It's not. It's actually more than that. There are a lot of hidden localities that the book tries to capture, I try to capture in the book. Ensure there is more than the vision that we see, what we see from the visual perspective, but actually understanding the localities from the non-visual perspective. So the ones that sometimes are hidden, sometimes we don't appreciate them perhaps because they are very much, we take them for granted. There are a lot of those localities that really shape the uniqueness and the actual values of the city of Chongqing in particular. And you know, our urban journeys are always very important. As a person who studies cities quite thoroughly, I love cities, and I really walk on cities quite a lot. I do believe this book is more than just a book. It's about actually the urban journeys that uncover the local pathways through which Chinese modernization actually became a lived reality. And I think Chongqing case represents that reality of Chinese modernization. So in my view, here we have a good example that we have had. So I think the good example for us is that both Brisbane and Chongqing are sister cities. Last year, with the presence of Ms. Megan Shah, we had a very good event held in Chongqing celebrating the 20th year anniversary of both cities, representing the fact that there are more than geographical similarities between the two parts, more than climate issues have, for example, between the two parts, climate challenges that we have in common, but socially, culturally, from the business point of view, trade, industries, are very important for us to capture those values that really are within our cities. I'd like to give two important acknowledgements, and perhaps one less important one. First one is that we rarely mention this, we mention it during the session sometimes, but we put it at the very end. But having events like this are very time-consuming, energy-consuming. I first like to acknowledge those who are behind these events like this. They take a lot of time. So I do believe their work needs to be appreciated. I'd like to thank them all on behalf of all of us. And the second part is that Chongqing has such a beautiful and great food culture. And every time I come here, doesn't matter how many days I stay here, I gain weight. I never feel hungry in Chongqing. That's one thing for sure. This not only represents good food in Chongqing, it represents hospitality, the good people we have in Chongqing. That's very important to be highlighted. And the third item, which is perhaps least important, is that despite being far from family and friends, I'm actually celebrating my birthday today here in Chongqing. So with you all here, with good friends, new friends, old friends, but again, in my favorite city, Chongqing. As I hope I'm growing older by age, I hope all of us grow older, I'm sure. I hope that we get the wisdom, see the cities going through those transitions as they become older, become more have better wisdom and more opportunities for people who live in them. So thank you all, and I invite you all to